All right, everybody, so we're back here with Bio 107, Module 13. Today we're going to be going over Part 1 of Module 13, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the emergence of the human species. So for Module 13, there's only a two-part lecture for this particular module, and so once I finish next lecture, that will be the conclusion of this particular chapter. And the readings for this this topic here can be found on pages 242 through 264. And that particular reading is a little bit lengthy, and there are no images or pictures in this particular chapter. There are a few diagrams of timelines, but be prepared for a more lengthy read. But it does document the emergence of the human species all the way through early humans to the modern day human. And so it's going to cover that in more of a text version of that history. So just be prepared for that. So all right, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to talk a little bit about assignments that are due, new assignments, and even some bonuses and final exams before we get started with the actual lecture. Okay, so as you all were aware, Parkland was having some serious technical difficulties, and so because all of their websites were down, including Cobra and other Parkland landing pages, I've extended all of the quizzes that were due this week. They were originally due on April 28th, but now they're due April 30th, so make sure you get those quizzes in. I'll probably leave them open a little bit longer just in case you're still having issues trying to access them. And I've also extended the Stickleback Fish Virtual Lab, so that's extended till April 30th as well. But I'll probably still accept your lab if they're a day late, just because of the issues that were happening. You weren't able to possibly access the lab. So these are your assignments: Module 11 quiz, Module 12 quiz. Remember, we had to squeeze those into basically 1 week or 1.5 weeks of lecture just because of the extended spring break that we experienced. And the Stickleback Virtual Lab is the lab that was done online. So for our new assignments, we have our Human Evolution Lab number 13. So this is going to be due May 5th. There is a new version of it, so please make sure you're using the correct version. It's another virtual lab, and if you're using the old version, then the virtual lab will not coincide with the instructions. And so there is a new version. It is located in Cobra. I have also emailed it out. If you have issues trying to find it, send me an email and we'll get it to you. So that new version of the Human Evolution Lab will be due May 5th. We also have our Module 13 quiz. That's going to be due May 5th as well, because it's only a two-part lecture series. And then our Module 14 quiz is going to be a take-home quiz. It's a short write-in-your-own answer for Module 14. That will be due May 7th. I'll likely extend some of these due dates and accept them even if they're a little bit late. And then also, I'm going to be talking about the final exam. It will be a take-home final, so we'll talk about that here in a second. Okay, I did assign an extra credit assignment. So because we were unable to have the last planetarium Kaler lecture series because of the virus closing everything down, you guys missed out on those 5 points because nobody was able to attend. And so to make up for that, I have assigned another extra credit assignment if you're interested in 5 points. This is an essay response assignment, and so you have to read the chapter that I've provided for you under Module 13 entitled Who Was the First Person Really? It's an essay. And so after you read that chapter, you have to write a 1-page paper on this topic. And so I want you to answer a few things after you read the reading. The first is, I want you to answer the question, who was the first person, really, using your own words and in a way that shows that you actually read the chapter. and that you actually understand the answer that Dr. Dawkins gives as well. Secondly, I would like you to critique the essay. Did you understand what the essay was saying? Did you find it informative or condescending? Did you like the essay? Did you not like the essay? Did you enjoy reading it? Were you bored? What were your thoughts is what I'm trying to get at here. And then lastly, I just really want to know your opinion of the chapter. And so you can include that in your third paragraph or so. So this is the extra credit assignment. I'll have it be due May 7th, probably. I didn't put a due date on that, but I'll probably accept it until May 7th. So if you're interested in doing the extra credit assignment, please feel free. If you're not interested, that's fine too. Okay, so for our final exam, I've had a few questions regarding the final exam already. So the final exam is going to be a take-home final. Everything's a take-home final or a take-home assignment at this point. But it is a take-home final. It is 4 questions long, and it is a writing assignment. And it's going to be due on May 12th at midnight, and I will give the assignment on May 5th. So be prepared for that. You'll have a week to work on it. And so, yeah, you'll just have to read the assignment when you actually get it and follow the prompts. But I've looked it over. It's not too challenging. It is kind of cumulative in a sense that I want you to use specific terms and show me what you've learned over the course of this entire semester. Believe it or not, we're in the home stretch, so we're getting there. Okay, so for our Module 13 reading, again, here it is, pages 242 to 264. So we're going to be talking all about the emergence of the human species. There's really not a way to break it down into sections, but we're just going to be talking today more of a general overview of the history of the human species. We're going to watch a video, and then we'll continue with more in-depth information in the following lecture. Okay, so let's first talk about primates. So we know that primates exist, right? So they are similar to us genetically and in physiology as well. But they have some characteristics here that we also have. And so we'll go through all of them, but they are similar to us in this respect. So if you look at a primate's hands, you'll notice they have nails and not claws, very similar to what we have, flat fingernails or just slightly curved that grow pretty long but flat. You know, they're not sharp like a cat or dog's nails because they're not necessarily used for gripping the ground as another species would. So characteristic number 1 would be nails, not claws. So for our second characteristics here that makes a primate extra notable is a grasping hand with an opposable thumb. So we all know about how special opposable thumbs are. They help us grab things with our hands. Primates are notorious for examining their world through their hands, just like humans. And so that opposable thumb really sets them aside. They also have stereoscopic vision, which is basically using a 3D or depth perceptive vision. So the front-facing eyes, but their eyes have this specific type of vision where that lets them analyze the world around them using this depth perception as well. Okay, characteristic number 4. Primates have an upper arm that moves freely in the socket. So you guys are all aware that you can make big round motions with your upper arm back and forth as it rotates around in the socket. So a lot of animals don't necessarily have this feature. For example, if you look at dogs, right, they can't do this motion with their front paw because they don't have the same kind of socket formation for their leg to go into. They can only move a backward and forward motion. They do have some sideways motion, but it's not to the length that we have. And so this is likely because primates were up in the trees at one point and they used their arm for swinging through the branches or climbing. And so we needed that range of motion in order to be able to survive. And then the fifth characteristic here is our rotating forearms. So our forearms themselves can rotate back and forth, and this helps us pick things up, look at things, move, climb, and a lot of other animals don't have this particular feature as well. I mean, if you look at cats or horses, they don't have the ability to rotate their forearm the way that primates or humans have. And so that is another defining feature of primates and what sort of special features that they are physiologically developed to do. But there are some differences here between apes and humans, right? So one of the largest ways that we can determine how we're different is by looking at our mouths. So our mouths are very different. Obviously, we have the ability to have language in the human species, where apes don't necessarily have that ability. So let's look at the first characteristic here. So this is a dental arcade. So what a dental arcade is basically the shape of the teeth in the mouth or the palate. And so if you look at the image here at the bottom, I'll kind of circle the one that I'm talking about here, this one that says man and ape here, you can see that the ape has a very elongated mouth and it's shaped more U-like, whereas man has a more shortened upper or bottom jaw, depending on what you're looking at here, and it's more O-shaped, so very round. So the dental arcade is the shape of the mouth. We also have primates also have canines that are way more defined. I mean, we have them too, but they're very small and short and not necessarily used for what apes use them for, which is biting into food sources or fighting. And so their canines, you can see here in this same image as well, that they have very defined canine teeth, whereas the human canine teeth looks very similar at this point in time to our other molars. So another thing that primates have that humans don't have is a diastema, which is basically a large space that's separating certain types of teeth from other types of teeth in the mouth of a primate. And so you can see here that here is a diastema, if you can see where my mouse is pointing to. In this particular case, the diastema is located in front of the canine teeth, but behind the incisors. So this would be like right here, right after these four front teeth that you have, there would be a space right before the canine tooth. And so basically this is spaces in the mouth separating different types of teeth. Now humans generally have very tight teeth where they're very close together, but you do find cases where humans, the rogue individual will have a large or small space between some teeth, and that's perfectly fine and natural, but it's not something that is found widespread across the human species to the extent that primates have this diastema. We also have here in our fourth difference, you can see the size of the jaw varies greatly as well. And so the ape's jaw is much larger, where the human jaw is much smaller. We have less of a muzzle or a snout as compared to the ape species, where their jaw is very protrusive and much longer. Their teeth are typically a lot larger as well. And then lastly here we have the simian shelf. Now the simian shelf is located along the bottom of the mouth, of the jaw here. And you can see in this particular image here on this that I'm circling here, the simian shelf, you can see that it's this area right here behind your lower incisor teeth, right underneath your tongue. It's a large bony plate where primates have a lot of a larger bony plate or simian shelf, where humans themselves do not have that. They have a very small bony plate right underneath their teeth, where it doesn't extend outward further into their mouth. And so those are just some differences that you can find, particularly in the mouth, between apes and humans. And this kind of puts us apart from them. Okay, so moving a little bit away from the mouth, but still mostly on the head region, we're talking more about differences between apes and humans here. So one of the other differences is the sagittal ridge or crest that you can find in the skull, and that's going along the back of the skull, where humans have a very round, smooth skull that were flatter, bony plates that were fused after you were born. Now, apes have this bony ridge that goes along the back of their head. And so that is one of the defining features that distinguishes the human species from ape species, is the existence of this sagittal crest, or this ridge on the back of the skull. This particular image here is a badger skull, but you can see it's very defined, this ridge or this crest. So this is not an ape skull, so it's not quite like that. But you will be able to see, if you look at the back of an ape skull, that it is there in existence. One of the other differences of the mouth, and I mentioned this a little bit on the last slide, but is the presence of a muzzle. You can see here that it's in apes, it's a more defined muzzle, where it's more protrusive than it is in humans, where it's much more flat. If you're looking at the skeleton or the skull of humans and apes and comparing them. So there's really more of a I guess, animal-like existence of the muzzle of the ape skull as compared to the humans. And then also we have an absence of a very pronounced eyebrow ridge. So you do find that in apes. You can see right here. Oops, sorry. Right above the eye socket, or the orbital socket, you can see that there is an eyebrow ridge that's very prominent, whereas humans, it is not necessarily very prominent. We don't have that very pronounced ridge right above our orbital sockets here, or our eyes, whereas apes typically do. And then lastly here, we see the existence of a chin in the human species, and not necessarily one in the existence of ape species. So you can see the pronounced chin that humans have that sticks out quite farther here if you're looking at the ape skull in comparison to the human skull. Now, because of that muzzle, apes don't have that chin feature really, and humans, because they're more flat-faced, at least in the lower section of their skull, you can see that they do have more of a pronounced lower chin. So these are just some more differences here, looking at the skeleton or the skulls of apes versus humans. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk a little bit about the evolution of apes through time. Kind of similar to what we did through the epochs, eons, periods, and eras that we talked about in the last module. We're going to talk about the evolution of primates, kind of going back through the history of all of these different species. Okay, so we're going to come up onto our first species, this adorable little chimpanzee-looking creature here. So I'm going to probably butcher this particular scientific name, but I'm going to go for it. So this is the Sahelanthropus tchadensis. So this is the first, or one of the original species that we can trace back to approximately 6 to 7 million years ago. And so this particular skeleton was found in pretty rough condition, or the skull here, all the little pieces of the bones here, was found in the African country of Chad in Central Africa. And so you could see here it's been pieced together after probably picking through a fossil bed of some sort. And if you look at the image here, this is a reconstruction of what the animal might look like if you had flesh on the skeleton here. They have a rather small head. And so this they have a very small cranial capacity. So this is approximately 320 to 380 centimeters of cranial capacity. So it's not very large at all. But as time goes on, we'll see that the cranial capacity increases greatly, especially with the evolution of these apes eating meat. Okay, so that's our first species here. So as time progresses through, now we're going to get into the Ardipithecus ramidus, and so this particular species was approximately 4.5 to 5.5 million years ago. And so this is a skeletal reconstruction here of some pieces that were found, and this is one that would possibly be a reconstruction of what one might look like in real life. Now you can see here the cranial capacity of this particular species is increasing. So now we're at 300 cc's, and this particular ape itself is about 3 feet tall. And one of the notable features for this Ardipithecus ramidus is prominent canine teeth, and so the canine teeth in this particular species is very pronounced. Okay, so now we're getting into Australopithecus. And so Australopithecus anamensis is approximately 4 million years ago. So Australopithecus anamensis has a cranial capacity still of about 300 centimeters, or a cranial capacity of 300. And so these are some reconstructions of some fossils that were found, and a possible facial reconstruction of what this ape might look like. Okay, so now we're moving along to Australopithecus afarensis. So this is what we know as Lucy. So you may have been familiar with Lucy. So this was one of the most complete skeletons that was found of one of our long ago ancestors here. So this is approximately 3.5 million years ago to 3 million years ago. And you can see here that the cranial capacity of this particular species is increasing. So now we've increased our cranial capacity by 100 centimeters. So now we're at 400. And you can see here the reconstruction of the skeletal remains of Lucy. And so this is the most complete skeleton that they've found. And if you go to museums, you can find a lot of information about them. And I think I saw a reconstruction of Lucy when I went to the Chicago Museum, which was pretty cool. But it would be what Lucy would particularly look like. There was some controversy over whether or not Lucy was a female or not in your book, but they have guesstimated that she is a female. And so this is the facial reconstruction of what she might look like here, and this is what the skeletal, the skull might look like as well. Okay, so now we're getting more into more recent times. We're at about 3 million years ago. Now we're going to talk about Australopithecus africanus. So this is now increasing in cranial capacity. We're at approximately 450 to 500 centimeters. So that's a pretty decent cranial capacity, but it's growing over time. And this is what we would call likely the first upright hominid, fully upright. And we do have a video from PBS talking about how lice have been an intricate part of determining when we evolved to have no body hair in certain areas. And so we'll play that. It's about 10 minutes long, but it talks a lot about Australopithecus africanus. And so hopefully it's not on YouTube, but I will get it up and running here in a second, if you give me a moment. All right, so this is going to look a little different, but hopefully we'll get it running here.
don't want to bring the virus home to you.
Oh, so this is an ad. Okay. Sorry, guys.
I haven't been this tired in a long time.
Once this ad is over, in 16 seconds, the correct video will play here.
In all types of darkness, there's always going to be some form of light.
Yes, we're all in this together. Okay.
Life existed on Earth for nearly 4 billion years before anything remotely resembling a human being showed up. And even then, when we started to branch off from other apes about 10 million years ago, our ancestors looked pretty different. For one thing, they were a lot hairier. Then, at some point, hair mostly disappeared from parts of our bodies and remained in a few others, including the head. Without body fur, we had to figure out how to make clothes to keep us warm. Since hair and clothes don't turn up much in the fossil record, figuring out when and why all this happened has stumped paleontologists. But recently, we discovered a witness to our hairy history. Correspondent Zaya Tong combed through the evidence to find a stealthy, diminutive creature who's now revealing some new clues to our origins and defining key steps on our path to being human.
These little creatures might not be pretty, but scientists are just now discovering how much lice can reveal about our past.
Presumably lice have been with us and evolving with us and adapting with us for as long as we have existed as a separate species, and even before the origin of humans.
Most parents are horrified to hear their child might have head lice. But when evolutionary biologist Mark Stoneking got the news, he was just curious.
My son came home from school with a note from the teacher saying that a child in his class had come to the class with lice, and in the pamphlet there were some facts about lice.
2 facts caught his eye. Head lice only live on the human scalp, and they cannot go more than a day without drinking our blood.
But then when I actually started to look into this in more detail, I discovered that it was potentially even more interesting.
Stoneking discovered that the story of lice contains clues about our ancient history, dating all the way back to the dawn of humanity itself. Most of what we know about human evolution comes from these: the fossilized bones of our ancestors. With their help, we've traced our evolution from small, furry creatures to the big-brained beings we've become today. But bones can't tell us everything. One mystery that stumped the fossil hunters is when we started wearing clothes. We're not talking about these kinds of clothes, but something more basic.
We don't have any direct evidence to answer the question when the first clothing developed. And it's a very important question.
Important because it'll help us get a handle on when we left Africa, our ancestral home, and spread out into colder regions. The earliest clues are bone-sewing needles dating as far back as 40,000 years ago. But we know early humans were world travelers long before that. Their fossil remains have been found across the globe.
They were tropical creatures, and they had to adapt to this new environment. And it's really some kind of puzzling question to figure out how they were able to cope with this kind of environment.
At some point, our ancestors figured out how to bundle up. But when? Lice may hold the answer.
It's really fascinating to me that we can use these parasites to study so many different aspects of human evolutionary history. Zaya, you are not going to believe the things we can learn.
David Reed is now the world's foremost expert on the evolution of lice. He thinks the pest can solve all kinds of mysteries about our past, like when we started wearing clothes. He's bringing me to a local strip mall in Florida to see if I've got what it takes to be a professional nitpicker.
Zaya, this is Katie from Lice Solutions.
Good to meet you, Katie.
Nice to meet you, too.
And what's your name?
Kylie.
Hello, Kylie. So what are we going to be looking for today?
We're going to see if Kylie has head lice.
Katie is going to teach me to remove lice the age-old way, by hand.
Initially, I like to part the hair here. See, right there, right there.
Okay,
Okay,
and then I just
there
go
you go.
straight like
You got
that?
it, absolutely.
Oh.
Now come straight out, all the way out.
Oh my goodness, oh my goodness. So I got you some samples. So what are we going to do with these guys?
Well, we're going to take them back to the lab and we're going to study their DNA.
Back in the lab, Reed studies the DNA of not only the head louse, but also of this little guy, Pediculus humanus humanus, the body or clothing louse. To the naked eye, it looks identical to the head louse, but there are a few key differences. It lives and lays its eggs only in clothes and bedding, and unlike the head louse, the clothing louse can kill you.
That it carries 3 different deadly diseases that have killed millions of humans over recent history. There are epidemic typhus, trench fever, and relapsing fever. Because of these diseases that they carry, they were partly responsible for absolutely decimating Napoleon's Grand Army through its famous Winter March.
As dangerous as they might be, for Reed, clothing lice are fascinating because they must have evolved from head lice, and they could only do that after we started wearing clothes.
Clothing lice wouldn't have had a niche to live in until humans started wearing clothing. So if we can learn when they first started to emerge from head lice populations, we can learn when humans began to wear clothing for the first time.
Reed set out to determine when the head louse and the clothing louse split into 2 separate species. To do that, he used a genetic dating technique called the molecular clock. Here's how it works. DNA is made out of a sequence of 4 chemicals known by their initials A, C, G, and T. The DNA sequence mutates or changes randomly, but at a known rate.
DNA sequences change by mutations, and the idea behind the molecular clock is that those changes are occurring at more or less a constant rate over time.
When Reed compared the DNA from modern clothing lice to human head lice, he discovered that the 2 species split over 170,000 years ago. And this, Reed says, is when we started to wear clothes.
170,000 years is important because that tells us that modern humans had the technology to use clothing while they were still in Africa, and that then allowed them to successfully colonize other parts of the world.
Scientists believe that the invention of clothing in Africa was a key factor in allowing our ancestors to migrate into colder climates and to spread across the globe. The invention of clothing is just one of the mysteries that lice are helping to solve. They also hold crucial clues to the big event that made clothing necessary in the first place: the loss of our fur.
So loss of body hair is interesting to anthropologists because it is a feature that distinguishes us from our nearest living relatives, chimpanzees. They have body hair, we don't.
The problem is no one has been able to determine when our ancestors took this big evolutionary step. It turns out that the answer may lie with another kind of lice, even less welcome than head lice. The crab or pubic louse lives only in the human pubic region and has large claws designed to grab on to the thicker hair. We know pubic lice didn't evolve from head lice. They're a completely different species. So different, we must have caught them from another animal.
Human pubic lice are more closely related to gorilla lice than they are to other human lice.
Actually, scientists don't know exactly how lice jumped from gorillas to our human ancestors. They speculate we may have eaten them or perhaps slept in their nests. But they do know that in order for crab lice to survive on our bodies, something had to give.
We lost our body hair, and that basically created if you will, a geographical barrier between the pubic region and the head region that the lice could not cross.
So both head lice and crab lice were able to thrive on our bodies thanks to this no-lice land, the expanse of skin on our torso. So if we can figure out when crab lice appeared as a separate species, that should tell us when we started showing all that skin. To find the answer, David Reed compared the DNA of gorilla lice and human crab lice. He found that the 2 species split about 3 million years ago. And that's when David Reed believes we lost our body hair, when we were still small chimp-like creatures with few of the qualities we consider human.
Most estimates don't go beyond 1 million years and suggest that we lost our hair around that time. These lice are telling us a very different story, that we might have lost our body hair as long as 3 million years ago.
And that's a milestone in human evolution, because losing their fur enabled our ancestors to regulate their body heat by sweating more efficiently. Eventually, they could run long distances and hunt wild animals. The protein this provided was essential to the development of a big brain, the hallmark of becoming human. Piecing together the details of our human journey is a challenging task. It's ironic that some of the most mysterious gaps are being filled in by a creature we never really liked.
We cannot neglect any piece of evidence, and if the lice teach us something, it's very important, so we cannot neglect the lice.
All right. So that's a fun video about how we're using other species to help determine where in the timeline certain events happened. And so they were saying, oh, maybe we lost our body hair 3 million years ago. So that was around the time that Australopithecus africanus was around. And so likely they started losing body hair at this point in time. And so just a neat little video for you guys, just some additional information to help put a better timeline with our history. Okay, so we're moving along here. So now we're at Australopithecus robustus. So now this particular species was around between 1 and 2 million years ago. As you can see, it's becoming more and more chimpanzee-like or human-like. It's evolving over time. Now this cranial capacity is right around the same as well, or a little bit more. It's around 500 centimeters, so this is a 500 cranial capacity. And over time, it's going to increase even more and more. So we're going to start seeing a really great increase, because we're going to start seeing our ancestors using all these tools to help us obtain meat, which is really going to help our brains grow nice and big into what we have today. So the Australopithecus robustus was one of the first species here that we know to have been using tools. So tool usage was somewhere in this time frame, just because of the tools we found in fossil beds or in caves or wherever, and they can be dated back to between 1 and 2 million years ago. Okay, so now we're getting into Homo habilis, and so this is approximately 1.8 million years ago. There's a really good timeline of our humanoid ancestors or hominid ancestors. Let me just look here. It's on page 252. And so I'll show it to you. This is a really good and useful tool here in order to see the timeline of how that humans and apes have evolved over time. So I recommend looking at this particular image here to help kind of track where we came from. Okay? So the Homo habilis was 1.8 million years ago. Now the cranial capacity is at 780 centimeters, or a cranial capacity of 780. And so habilis means handy, and so now we see these ancestors here being really useful and creative with their hands and creating tools and using their hands in new and unique ways. So this particular species, the fossils were found in fossil beds of Lake Turkana, and this is in Kenya in Africa. I've just included some cool images of what potentially they looked like here, rendering of what they they possibly could have looked like based on their skull. And this just to give you an idea of how we're taking shape over time. Okay, so now we're getting into Homo erectus. So this was between 200,000 and 1.8 million years ago. Now our cranial capacity is really increasing greatly. And so now we're at 850 to 1100 centimeters, or a cranial capacity of that. And you can see now we're being really useful with tools. Maybe we're using spears, or fashioning some sort of very unique hunting weapons in order to obtain meat. Because as the video mentioned, one of the main reasons our brains have grown so large is the ability to acquire meat and use that for our nutrition. Okay, so moving right along here, now we're at Homo neanderthalensis. So these are our Neanderthals. And so these occurred approximately, it's kind of cut off here, but 150 to 30,000 years ago. So these are the Neanderthals that we know of. They were particularly found in limestone caves in Germany, the Neanderthal cave paintings or whatever. And these particular individuals here had a cranial capacity of approximately 1,600 centimeters. And so the cranial capacity, or CC, that's what the CC stands for, is cranial capacity. But if you measure it, it's 1,600 centimeters in diameter. And that's all in your book as well. But take a look at the skull in this image here. You can see that the skull is looking a lot more human-like, less pronounced brow ridges than that of our ape ancestors, a much more, a greater presence of a chin, a flatter front face. And this is just an artist rendering of what a model of a Neanderthal might look like back when they existed on Earth. Okay, so now we're moving right along to Homo sapiens, or Cro-Magnon. So these particular individuals here are our modern humans. So obviously our genus and species are Homo and sapiens, and so this occurred approximately 43,000 years ago. And these Homo sapiens were in Europe primarily, but they were known to travel quite a bit. And so their cranial capacity was still at about 1,600 centimeters. And so the human skull in this image here is very modern human-like, the Cro-Magnon species. And obviously they were hairless tool users, and over time they became more and more like us. So this is just a phylogenetic arrangement of two different scientists trying to determine how we branched off, because we're not exactly sure. So we have Australopithecus afarensis, and so we're not sure if they were the primary ancestor of all of these other species, or if there was another ancestor. So Johansen thought Australopithecus afarensis was the main common ancestor here, but Richard Leakey thought that maybe there was someone else or a different species that came before Australopithecus afarensis. And so obviously after that, though, their phylogenetic arrangement looks pretty similar. So Paraparanthus robustus, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo sapiens, those all look pretty much the same after that. But that's just the one feature that they're not quite sure of, is if there was someone before Australopithecus afarensis. Okay, and I think this is my last slide here today. And so for modern humans, where were our origins? We're on all of the continents except for, I guess, Antarctica. But in Africa, in Europe, in Asia, and Australia, we all exist in those locations. And so this is just showing that we were one species that was known to travel. And as we traveled and became established, we began to form the 6 different ethnicities that are in existence. And so The ethnic background was established depending on where these Cro-Magnon or original Homo sapiens decided to make their home at. And so, but eventually they've dispersed, but they have all come from an African origin. So we did all come out of that particular location originally, and dispersed over time into the different continents in which we currently live. Okay, so that's all I have for today, for today's lecture. And so I will be back with another lecture on part 2 of module 13, the last part of that particular module. And then hopefully you guys should be all ready to take your quiz after that. All right, thank you guys, and I will talk to you all soon.